Hello everybody. Today we'll talk about the tissue. As you know, the tissue is a collection of many similar cells. Many similar cells group together or join together to form a tissue. There are four different types of tissues in the human body. We'll talk about those four different types of tissues. Today we'll talk about the epithelial tissue, muscle tissue or muscular tissue, nervous or neural tissue. So we'll talk about these three types of tissues today, and in next lecture I'll talk about the connective tissue. So these are four different types of tissues from the structures of the human body. First, we'll see the location of those four different types of tissues in the body. Nervous tissue or neural tissue forms the nervous system, and as you know that nervous system consists of the brain, the spinal cord and many nerves. So those are the structures formed by the nervous tissue. So next is the muscle tissue. Muscle tissue are three different types: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle is voluntary. That means you can control the skeletal muscles, and skeletal muscles are attached to the skeleton. That means attached to the bones, and since they are attached to the bones and they are voluntarily controlled, we can move the bones or body parts with the help of the skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is only present in the wall of the heart, so involuntary muscle and present only in the heart. So skeletal muscle is voluntary and attached to the bones, and cardiac muscle is involuntary. That means we cannot control involuntary and found only in the heart. Highly specialized type muscle tissue. And another type of muscle tissue is the smooth muscle tissue. It is also involuntary. And where you will find the smooth muscle? Smooth muscle is present in the wall of the tube-like structures of the body. So what are the tube-like structures in your body? Intestine. So in the wall of the intestine you have a smooth muscle. Blood vessels, arteries, veins. In the wall of the blood vessels you have smooth muscle. Wall of the hollow organs. Hollow organs. For example, stomach. So if you see the wall of the stomach, you have the smooth muscle. Okay. Wall of the tube-like structures, you have smooth muscle. And what are the other hollow organs? Uterus, urinary bladder, gallbladder, right? Stomach. So on in the wall of those hollow organs, you have a smooth muscle. So those are the locations of three different types of muscle or muscle tissue. Then epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is found in the covering of the body. That means the skin, outer layer of the skin or covering of the body. Inner linings of tube-like and hollow organs. Again, so as I mentioned that the wall of the tube-like and hollow organs is formed by smooth muscle. So in the wall here you have the smooth muscle. However, if you see the inner thin lining here, innermost layer, it is epithelial tissue. So inner lining of the tube-like structures and the inner lining of the hollow organs. That means inner lining of the stomach, gallbladder, urinary bladder, right, uterus, you have the epithelial tissue. Then connective tissue, most widely distributed tissue in the body is the connective tissue. Many organs or structures of your body are formed by the connective tissue. Bones are connective tissue, tendons, ligaments, right? Joint capsules, cartilages, okay? Blood is also a connective tissue. Fats. So all these structures are formed by the connective tissue. So connective tissue is the most widely distributed tissue in the body, and in many different types of organs or structures you have the connective tissue. Okay, so we'll talk about the epithelial tissue first. How we classify the epithelial tissue? We classify the epithelial tissue by two ways. One is by location, and another way is by arrangement of the cells in the tissue. Okay, so first we'll see how we classify the epithelial tissue by location. By location, we divide the epithelial tissue in two types. One is called covering or lining, covering and lining. What is that? You remember I mentioned that the outer layer of the skin is the covering of the body, right? So outer layer of the skin is called epidermis, of the skin, which is the covering epithelium, and lining. I also mentioned that inner lining of tube-like organs, right? Like arteries, veins, your trachea, respiratory tract, GI tract, intestine, right? And the inner lining of the hollow organs, stomach, gallbladder, urinary bladder, uterus. Innermost thin layer is here that is epithelial tissue. Okay, so outer covering and inner lining, that is one type. Another type is called glandular, inside the glands, epithelium. Okay, so by location we divide into two types. By arrangement of the cells, we divide or classify the epithelial tissue by looking at the shape of the cells and the number of layers. So shape and number of layers, we classify the epithelial tissue. First, if you see, the cells of the epithelial tissue are flat like this. These are the cells and nucleus inside. So this is nucleus. So these are flat cells. And remember one thing, that all epithelial tissues are supported by underlying connective tissue. So this is a connective tissue. Okay. So under the epithelial tissue, you have the connective tissue that supports the epithelial tissue. So this is the epithelium. Okay, epithelial tissue. So here you see this underlying connective tissue that supports the epithelial tissue is called basement membrane. Okay, so basement membrane is a connective tissue. Anyway, so here you see these cells are flat epithelial cells, and flat cells are called squamous. Okay, squamous. So this is squamous. Another type of cells in the epithelial tissue are cubical shaped. So this is the connective tissue basement membrane, and the cells here in this epithelial tissue are cubical or cube shaped. Okay, nucleus. So this type of epithelial tissue is called cuboidal. Okay, cuboidal. So this is squamous, this is cuboidal. Okay, and then another type of epithelial tissue where the cells are tall. So height is more than the width, and nucleus inside. So this is called columnar. Makes sense, right? So squamous, this flat. The word squamous means the scale of, the fish. The skin of the fish or surface of the fish has flat scales. So these cells look like the scale of the fish. That's why called squamous. Then cuboidal, cube shaped, the height and width almost same. And columnar, the cells are tall like columns. Okay, and there is another type of epithelial tissue where the cells don't have any particular shape. Why? Because the shape of these cells change all the time. Okay, so it's not fixed. Sometimes the cells are more flat, sometimes more like, columnar. So these cells, nucleus inside, change their shape, and that's why this type is called transitional. Okay, transitional epithelium. Okay, so let's go back. Flat cells, squamous epithelium, cubical or cube shaped cells, cuboidal epithelium, tall columnar epithelium, and those in that epithelial tissue where the cells change their shape, so the shape is not fixed, that is transitional. Okay, now if you see the number of layers, so if you see a single layer, that means simple. So the term we use simple to indicate single layer. Okay, so if you see one layer, it is simple. Stratified is multiple layer. Okay, more than one, multiple layers. So the term stratified indicates multiple. Now if I ask you, this is squamous flat cells, and how many layers? Only one. So this is called simple squamous. Makes sense? Single layer. Now if I add more layers, this is no more simple. This is now called what? Stratified squamous. Makes sense? Multiple layers of flat cells. So this is now no more simple. This is stratified. Okay, squamous. Similarly, this is a single layer of cuboidal cells. So simple cuboidal. Okay, now it is simple cuboidal. Now if I add more layers, now it is what? Stratified cuboidal. Makes sense? So this is now stratified cuboidal. This is simple columnar, single layer of columnar cells. So simple columnar. Now if I add more layers, then this is no more single, it is called stratified columnar. Okay, transitional is transitional, no fixed shape of the cells. Okay, so that's how we classify the epithelial tissue based on the shape of the cells and the number of the layers. That means the arrangement. There is another type. This is interesting, where you'll see the cells are tall columnar cells. However, the height of these cells is different. Although all these are columnar, right? But the cells have different heights. Some are very tall, some are tall but less. Okay, and nucleus inside. And although here you see a single layer of columnar cells, since the height of these columnar cells is different, when you see this tissue under the microscope, because of different heights of the cells and the location of the nucleus is different, it will look like multiple layer under the microscope, although it is a single layer. That's why this type of epithelial tissue is called pseudo stratified. Pseudo means false, multiple layer. Actually it is what? A single layer, but looks like multiple layer. That's why it is called pseudo, means false, multiple layer. Pseudo stratified columnar, right? Columnar epithelium. In many cases we see in pseudo-stratified columnar, the upper free end of the cells have soft hair-like structures called cilia. Okay, so these are hair-like structures called what? Cilia. So that's why this type of epithelial tissue is also called pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar because they have cilia. Okay, and these cilia are very helpful to move the mucus away, okay, to clean the surface of the organ. So that is how we classify the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue has some important properties that make the epithelial tissue different than other three types of tissues. So we already know that epithelial tissue is supported by underlying connective tissue, right? That is called the basement membrane. So this is the connective tissue that supports the epithelial tissue, right? So this is the epithelial tissue, and in the epithelial tissue nucleus, in the epithelial tissue the cells have a free end. This is the free end and the attached surface or end. So upper end is free and lower end or surface is attached to the basement membrane, and this free end is called the apical end or surface. And the attached surface is called basal end or surface. So that is one property, that the basal end and free end, and basal end is attached and free end is the upper end. In many cases we see the free apical surface has hair-like structures that I mentioned in last slide. If you see, these hair are kind of hard, like brush border. These hair are called microvilli. So microvilli are the hair-like structures. They are kind of hard, won't move too much. And sometimes we see these hair are soft. So if you see the hair are soft and they move easily, beat or move easily, these are called cilia. So the difference between the cilia and microvilli is cilia are soft, okay, can move easily, and microvilli are hard, form brush border. Microvilli are mainly responsible for absorption, helps in absorption of nutrients from the intestine. Okay. However, cilia bit to clean the surface. So cilia are used to clean the surface. Okay. So although both are hair-like structures, they are structurally different. One is hard kind of hair and another soft, and their functions are also different. Then another important property of the epithelial tissue is epithelial cells are attached to each other by intercellular junctions, the protein structures that hold the cell membranes together. Adjacent cell membranes are attached to each other by these protein structures called the intercellular junctions. Okay, so junctions. This is an important property of the epithelial tissue. If you see the connective tissue, in most of the cases, you will see the cells are not attached to each other. They are separated like this. So these are the cells and they are not attached to each other. But in case of epithelial, you remember I always did draw like this. That means what? The cells are packed together, attached to each other by special junctions called the intercellular junctions. So it is not easy to separate the cells. They stay together. Good example of it is when your skin gets dry, sometimes you can peel the skin, right? A chunk of skin will come up. If you see the skin of the snake, when the snake changes the skin, the whole chunk of skin comes off as a piece. Uh, why? Because the cells are strongly attached to each other by the junctions. Two types of junctions attach the cells together: tight junctions and desmosums. Okay, so these are the junctions. Epithelial tissue is avascular. A means absence, vascular means blood vessels. So no blood vessels or blood circulation is present in the epithelial tissue. No circulation of blood, avascular. Then the question is how the epithelial tissue then gets the nutrition and oxygen, right? Under the epithelial tissue, remember I said you have the connective tissue, and this connective tissue has the blood vessels, blood circulation here. So from this blood, by diffusion, oxygen and nutrition go to the epithelial tissue. Although epithelial tissue doesn't have any blood vessels or circulation, but it gets nutrition and oxygen from the underlying connective tissue, which has the blood circulation. high rate of regeneration. This is an important property of the epithelial tissue. What is this? The dead epithelial tissue is quickly replaced by new epithelial tissue. That means the epithelial tissue can quickly regenerate. And you all know that when you lose the skin, quickly new skin is formed, right? When you drink something very hot, you burn the epithelium in your mouth, epithelial lining or epithelial tissue of your mouth and tongue. However, quickly new epithelial tissue is formed, right? Uh, so the epithelial tissue can quickly regenerate. So those are the important characteristics or properties of the epithelial tissue. Classification I already explained by looking at the shape of the cells, right, and how many layers. If the cells are flat, that is called squamous, and if they form a single layer, it is simple. Simple means single layer, and if you see multiple layers, that is stratified. Shapes of the epithelial tissue cells, I have already explained this. Now, in next few slides, what I will do, I will show you how different types of epithelial tissues look under the microscope, the histology of the epithelial tissues. And also, I will mention a couple of important locations where you will find that particular type of epithelial tissue. Okay, let's first start with simple type, single layer. So here you see the alveoli of the lung. Inside the lung, you have the air sacs or air balls called the alveoli. And if you see the wall of the alveoli, you'll see thin wall formed by a single layer of flat cells, squamous cells like this. So this is the wall, and it is formed by a single layer of squamous cells. That's why it is called simple squamous. Let me draw here. So if you see this wall carefully, you'll see in the wall you have the flat cells like this. So this is another flat cell. Okay, this is another flat cell. Okay, so you see, and nucleus inside. So these are the squamous cells, flat and a single layer, right? So this is simple squamous. So that is one location in the body. You will find simple squamous wall of the alveoli or air sacs inside the lung, number one. Another important area where you will find the simple squamous, you remember the wall of the heart. This is the heart and this is the wall, and the innermost lining is formed by a single layer of squamous cell. So this is also simple squamous. Inner lining of the heart, and this inner lining makes the inner surface of the wall of the heart smooth. Also, in the inner lining of the blood vessels. So this is a blood vessel, and if you see the innermost lining, thin layer of simple squamous. So remember those three areas: wall of the alveoli or air sacs in the lung, innermost thin lining of the heart, and innermost lining of the blood vessels. Okay. Then simple cuboidal. If you see these tube-like structures here in this picture, just let's see only one tube-like structure. Tubules or ducts, cross section. This is the lumen and this is the wall. Now if you see the wall, in the wall you have a single layer of cubical shaped cells. So you see this is one cell here, this is another cell, this is another cell and nucleus. Okay, so this wall of this tube-like structure or duct is formed by a single layer of cuboidal cells. So this is simple cuboidal. Makes sense? Now the problem is when you see the tissue under the microscope, it is not that easy. It is very challenging. You have to be very careful. Like let's see how you know that the cells in the wall are cuboidal shaped cells, because the cells in many cases the wall of the cell is not clearly seen under the microscope. Actually the cells should be like this nucleus. Okay, you can see the purple nucleus. So if you look carefully where you can clearly see the cell membrane, like this one here, you see the cell membrane here, it is clear. So this is cuboidal shaped cell. So other cells are like same. Here you can see the cell membrane clearly. So cuboidal, right? So all these cells are cuboidal cells and form a single layer, simple cuboidal. In the wall of the tube-like structures inside the kidney called the kidney tubules. Okay, inside the kidney you have many tiny tube-like structures called the kidney tubules or nephrons. Okay, in the wall of the nephrons or kidney tubules, you will see simple cuboidal. Also, inside the glands, you have ducts, ducts of the small glands. Okay, you know ducts are tube-like structures too. So in the wall of the duct of the glands, you will find simple cuboidal. So remember those two locations. This is simple columnar. You can clearly see the tall columnar cell, right? And they have formed a single layer. So simple columnar. Where you will find the simple columnar? In the GI tract or gastrointestinal tract, but not everywhere. Where? The lower part, from the stomach and below. So stomach and below is intestine, small intestine, then large intestine, right? So innermost lining of these structures of GI tract, you have the simple columnar. Above the stomach you have the esophagus and pharynx, where you have different epithelial lining. That's why we say GI tract, stomach and below, not above, because in the mouth, in the esophagus, in the pharynx, you have different type of epithelial lining. Okay. Also, simple columnar is found in the inner lining of the gallbladder. So if this is the gallbladder, wall of the gallbladder, okay, and innermost lining here is simple columnar, okay. A small part of uh, also in the inner lining of the bronchial inside the lung, bronchioles inside the lung. So just remember those few areas where you'll find simple columnar type epithelium, then pseudostratified columnar. You remember it is a single layer of columnar cells but looks like multiple layer. So that's why it is called pseudo stratified. And I also mentioned that usually uh, at the upper surface of the cells you have hair-like structures. These soft hair-like structures are called cilia. And where you find the pseudostratified columnar, in the upper respiratory tract, that means inside the nasal cavity, trachea, okay. uh, in those uh, uh, upper respiratory tract structures have pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelial lining. Why? Because this epithelium has cilia, and the cilia work like broom. Cleaning is the function I mentioned before. Why cleaning is necessary there inside the upper respiratory tract? Because you know that mucus is secreted in the upper respiratory tract, and that mucus gets dirty, so cilia will act like broom. The cilia always move to push that mucus towards the GI tract, stomach. So cleaning is the function. That's why in the respiratory tract where mucus is secreted, you have the pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Uh, Now we'll talk about the stratified. That means multiple layers. Here you see in this part you have many layers of flat cells like this. Many layers of flat cells. In many of these cells you don't see the boundary or cell membrane clearly. However, you can see the nuclei very clearly. So the cells are like this. Okay, so many layers of flat cells. That's why stratified squamous epithelium. One thing you just remember, which is important, where you find the stratified squamous epithelium, in those areas the friction chance of getting friction is high. So now you know that the outer layer of the skin, which is the epidermis of the skin, always we get friction on the surface of the skin. So skin epidermis is stratified squamous. It makes sense, right? Inside the mouth or oral cavity, the lining is oral cavity or mouth. The lining is stratified squamous because when you put the food and chew the food, right, so friction occurs. So stratified squamous. Inner lining of the esophagus. Why? Esophagus also gets friction. of the food, because esophagus is a narrow tube that takes the food to the stomach, okay, and the food is still in solid form. The food becomes liquid in the stomach. However, before it enters into the stomach, the food is still in solid form. So when that solid food bolus passes through the narrow esophagus, uh, in the inner surface of the esophagus, you get friction. So that's why it is stratified squamous, inner lining of the vagina. So these are the main areas where you see the stratified squamous epithelium. Now we divide the stratified squamous into two types: keratinized here and non-keratinized. Just know that in the dry surface or areas you have keratinized, and in wet or moist surface you have non-keratinized stratified squamous. So now let's see, skin is dry surface, so it is keratinized stratified squamous. Okay, a special protein keratin is present. Moist surface, oral cavity or mouth, esophagus and vagina. So these are moist areas, so you have non-keratinized. Okay, non-keratinized. Transitional. You remember I mentioned that transitional epithelium uh, cells change their shapes, and two important properties that transitional epithelium has. One is, number one, does not allow the fluid pass through it. So fluid cannot pass through the transitional epithelium. Very important property. Number two, by changing the shape, the transitional epithelium can absorb pressure. Transitional epithelium has elasticity, and that is given by the property of the change of the shape of the cells. When more pressure is given on the transitional epithelium, the cells get flat, and by changing the shape of the cells, it can absorb that pressure. It's like, elastic property, elasticity, and these two are very important properties: absorb pressure and get stressed. Okay, so how these two properties help? The transitional epithelium is present inside the urinary bladder, and inside the ureter. Inside the urinary bladder, urine is stored, and also inside the ureter, urine is always present, because ureters are the tubes that take the or transport the urine from the kidneys to the bladder, right? So in these two organs, you always have urine inside. And since the epithelial lining is transitional, that urine or fluid cannot pass through the transitional epithelium and cannot get back into the body when it is present inside the urinary bladder or ureter. So here, this is the urinary bladder. You have urine here, right? Since this epithelial lining is transitional, it will not let the urine get back or go back to the body. Urine will stay inside. Number one. Number two property helps because the urinary bladder gets bigger and smaller. When it is full, you know, the wall gets a lot of pressure, and that pressure can be absorbed by the transitional epithelium. So when the urinary bladder is expanded, then the cells, transitional epithelial cells, get more flat to absorb that pressure. When the urinary bladder is empty, gets squeezed or small, then the cells get more like columnar, tall. So having these two properties of the transitional epithelium, they really help uh, by preventing the urine from going back to the body and getting stressed when the pressure increases. Stratified cuboidal is only present in very few structures. The stratified cuboidal is found in the mammary gland, that means in the female breast. You have stratified cuboidal, that means multiple layer in the cuboidal epithelium. Okay. Stratified columnar also very rarely, in only few areas, small areas, you will find the pharynx, male urethra, part of male urethra, lining of some glandular ducts. Since they are very rare, you don't need to really remember, just remember this one. In the female breast or mammary gland, you will find the stratified cuboidal. So this slide is not that important for you to memorize. Okay. Now I'll talk about the connective tissue. Connective tissue is the most widely distributed tissue in the body, and as you know that many structures of your body are formed by the connective tissue. Okay, so connective tissue originate from an embryonic tissue that is called mesenchyme. Okay, all connective tissues originate from this embryonic tissue. Bones come from mesenchyme, cartilages come from mesenchyme, ligaments, tendons, fats, blood, all of them originate from the same source, this embryonic tissue. Okay, connective tissue has varying degrees of vascularities. Some connective tissues don't have blood vessels. For example, cartilage, ligaments, tendons, they don't have any blood vessels. Some connective tissues have small amount of blood circulation. For example, bones have blood vessels, and some have more blood vessels. So that's why we say varying degrees of vascularities. Okay. In the connective tissue, you will see few things. Cells are usually not attached to each other. So you have cells, different types of connective tissue cells, but not like epithelial tissue. They are not usually attached to each other. And in between the cells, you have matrix. Okay, so matrix. Now in the matrix, you have two things: the chemicals called the ground substances, the chemical, and fibers. Okay, so the chemicals are ground substances, and also we see different types of fibers. Okay, so that is the typical structure of the connective tissue. We have cells and matrix. Matrix consists of the ground substances and fibers. Important functions of the connective tissue. Since the name is connective tissue, its name came from the main function of this tissue, that is connecting different structures. You know, ligaments, tendons, they connect different structures. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscle to bone. So bone to bone, tendon, muscle to bone. Okay, cartilages connect also one bone to another bone, right? So connecting is one important function. Protection. You know that bones are connective tissue structures, right? And bones protect important organs in your body. Your cranial bones protect the most important organ, which is the brain, right? Vertebrae protect the spinal cord. Ribs protect your heart and lungs. So protection is an important function. Support. You know that whole skeleton is formed by the connective tissue, right? Bones, cartilages, and the joints. So the whole body is supported by the skeleton or bones. Flexibility. One type of connective tissue is elastic cartilage, and where you have the elastic cartilage, that tissue or organ has flexibility. For example, your pinna of the ear. So ear has elastic cartilage. So you can change the shape easily, and when you remove the pressure, it goes back to its actual shape, right? Transport. Blood is a connective tissue. It is a special type of connective tissue because it is in liquid form, and you know that blood is the major transport medium in the body. Most of the chemicals are transported by the blood. So these are some important functions of the connective tissue. Now I told you that in the matrix you have ground substances and the fibers. So there are three types of fibers we see in the connective tissue. Not all three types are present in the same connective tissue. In some connective tissues you will see only one type. Some connective tissues you will see two different types, right? So there are three different types of connective tissues. fibers are in the connective tissue. And so what are those three types of fibers? Most common is called the collagen fiber. Common. The color is white, but when you stain, usually it takes red color. Okay, so when you will see under the microscope in the tissue, it will look red, but actually it is white. Okay, but can be stained by red color, and it is the most common. Elastic fiber, thin fibers present in the elastic tissue. Example, elastic cartilage, and it gives the flexibility or elasticity. Reticular fibers are found in those organs uh, where you have uh, structures like network like structures inside. For example, inside the liver, spleen, bone marrow, and lymph organs, other lymph organs. Okay, so uh, reticular fibers, elastic in the ear, right? And collagen fiber is found in the ligaments, tendons, capsules, in those structures. So those are three types of fibers in the connective tissue. Since there are many different types of structures that are formed by the connective tissue, you have many different types of connective tissue cells. Okay, the most common type is fibroblast, and since fat is a connective tissue, fat cells are connective tissue cells. Another type of cells are mast cells, releases heparin, macrophages, phagocytic cells, cells of the cartilages. Since cartilage is a connective tissue, chondrome is cartilage. Okay, so chondroblasts, blasts are young cells, young cartilaginous cells, and cytes are mature cells, so chondrocytes. Since bone is a connective tissue, the cells of the bones are connective tissue cells. Osteo means bone, blast young bone cells, osteocytes are mature bone cells. Hematopoietic stem cells in the bone marrow. So all those belong to connective tissue cells. Here you see that I showed you before. You have cells and ground substance and matrix fibers. Now the classification of the connective tissue. I'll show you the classification here, which would be very helpful for your lecture as well as in the lab. So it is kind of wide classification, but if you write it down and remember, will be very helpful. Okay, so classification of connective tissue. Okay, first we divide the connective tissue into connective tissue proper, this is the main type, connective tissue proper. Then cartilages are connective tissue, bones are also connective tissue, you already know, and blood or liquid type connective tissue. Okay, so first we divide the connective tissue into these four groups: connective tissue proper, the main type, then cartilaginous, bones, and liquid type connective tissue. Then connective tissue proper is divided into two types: loose connective tissue proper and dense connective tissue proper. The difference between loose and dense, from their names you can tell. In loose, you will see in the tissue there are few fibers or no fibers. So loose has no or few what? Fibers. Okay. In dense, you have plenty of fibers, heavily packed, plenty of fibers, and they are heavily packed. That's why it is called dense. Okay. Now, loose is divided into three types: loose areolar, loose reticular, and loose adipose. Okay, three types. In areolar, you have two types of fibers: collagen and elastic. You remember there are three types of connective tissue fibers in last slide I mentioned. So two of those three are present in areolar. In reticular, you have reticular type fibers, okay, and adipose no fibers. So these are three types of loose connective tissue proper. Okay, dense, heavily packed collagen fibers, most common type of fibers. Collagen, heavily packed. Okay, plenty of collagen fibers. And dense is divided into two types: dense regular and dense irregular. Okay, so this is how we classify the connective tissue proper. First we divide into loose and dense, and loose three types, dense two types. Then cartilaginous, there are three types of cartilaginous. Most common type of cartilage is hyaline. Then another type is called fibrocartilage, and the other type elastic cartilage. Okay, so those are three types of cartilages. We'll see where you will find them. Then bones, two types: compact, hard bone is the compact bone, and soft bone is the spongy. Soft bone is the spongy bone. Okay, and liquid type of connective tissue includes the blood and the fluid in the lymphatic system called the lymph. So both are liquid and they belong to the connective tissue. So this is the whole classification of the connective tissue. So if you just remember this, it will be very easy for you to follow. Okay, so here you see connective tissue proper, loose and dense, right? We have shown here. So in next few slides I'll quickly go over how that type of connective tissue looks like under the microscope, and then a couple of structures I'll mention where you'll find that type of connective tissue. First, let's start with connective tissue proper, loose. There are three types of loose. You remember: areolar, reticular, and adipose. So areolar. You remember I said two types of fibers are found in areolar. These red fibers, they usually form bundle, and that is collagen. And elastic thin fibers, these dark colored thin hair-like fibers are elastic. And the cells, these cells are called the fibroblast, connective tissue cells. Okay, so this is how the areolar type of loose connective tissue proper looks like under the microscope. Where you will find this type of connective tissue, you remember when we talked about the epithelial tissue, I said that epithelial tissue is supported by the underlying connective tissue, the basement membrane. So this is actually formed by areolar type of connective tissue. Okay, that basement membrane is also called lamina propria. Same thing. Okay, so this is lamina propria or basement membrane that supports the epithelial tissue. Okay, also loose areolar you will find around the capillaries. You know, the capillary wall is very thin, so around the capillary you have this type of soft areolar connective tissue that provides cushioning. Okay, protects the capillary walls. So those two areas you remember. Loose, another type of loose is adipose, which is actually fat. So these are the fat cells, and in fat cells, when you'll see them under the microscope, they look like round eggs. And interestingly, the cell, inside the cell, you will see the fat uh, vacuoles. Let's see, or fat droplets inside the cell, and nucleus is attached to the membrane. Here you see, this is the nucleus, this is the cell. Okay, so nucleus is not in the center because the cell is mostly empty. There are some large fat droplets inside. However, the nucleus is not supported to stay in the center, gets attached to the membrane. So this is adipose, uh, where you will find a lot of fat tissue in the mammary gland or female breast, in the under the skin, particularly in female body. You'll see a lot of fat under the skin, that is called the subcutaneous fat, right? Under the wall of the abdomen, you have a lot of fat. So those are the main areas where you will find a lot of fat or adipose tissue: female breast or mammary gland, under the abdominal wall, and in the under the skin in the female body, subcutaneous fat. Fat tissue works as a stored source of energy. Then another type of loose, reticular. You see these thick fibers, dark colored reticular fibers. And as I mentioned, in the lymphatic organs and spleen, tonsils, bone marrow, right? In those organs, you'll find the reticular type of connective tissue. Then dense regular. Here you see these are collagen fibers, heavily packed. And why it is called regular? Because all the fibers are running in same direction, although wavy, but all of them are going to the same direction. So that's why it is called regular connective tissue, dense, regular here. Okay, and these cells are fibroblasts. Okay, so lot of collagen fibers heavily packed, and that's why it is dense, and the cells are fibroblasts. Where you will find the dense regular tendons, ligaments, just remember these two. Okay, dense irregular, you see here again collagen fibers, but the fibers form bundles and they are running um, in different directions, not same directions. Some bundles are going like this, some are going like this, so not regular, irregular. And where you will find dense irregular, and the dermis of the skin, dermis of the skin, okay, and capsules of the joints. Just remember those two. Cartilages, three types of cartilages: hyaline, most common type, elastic, and fibro. Hyaline cartilage is found in many structures. Fetal skeleton, whole skeleton of a fetus is formed by hyaline cartilage. Okay, then costal means rib cartilages. Those cartilages are attached to the ribs in the thoracic case. Articular or joint cartilages. In the joints, synovial joints, you have articular. Articular means joint cartilages. Okay. Then also in the respiratory tract, in the trachea, bronchioles, larynx, respiratory tracts, trachea, larynx, bronchi. Okay, so these are the structures, main structures where you will find the hyaline cartilage. Elastic cartilage in only few structures, ear, pinna of the ear, okay, and also in the nasal septum. You can move it, right? The partition of the nose. Epiglottis. Okay, so you see these two start with E. So elastic in the ear, epiglottis. Fibrocartilage is found in the meniscus of the knee joint. Fibrocartilage is very hard, tough, because it has plenty of fibers. Okay, and also in the intervertebral discs, intervertebral discs, the discs between the vertebrae, and pubic symphysis. This cartilage connects two hip bones together. Okay, so these are the three structures formed by fibrocartilage. Okay, so let's stop here, and in next lecture we'll finish rest of the connective tissue and muscle tissue and neural or nervous tissue.